good start, and just ready to have a joyous Chinese New Year, those who are celebrating that this week. Oh, turn the mic on. Yes, thank you. We gotta say something. Okay. There we go. Okay. So it's been a while since we've been. Last year I was going through a series on the life of David, and then because of the last time I preached here was Christmas, and then summer I had was out of town a lot, wasn't able to preach here. But I'd like to pick up the life of David series that we've been going through. Basically, where we are in David's story. David's one of the great heroes of the Bible, but he's a hero in the sense that God uses David. God is very heavily involved in David's life because David loves God, and David's a man after God's own heart, and so he becomes heroic in that sense. And at this stage, but that doesn't mean that his life is easy. There's been just tremendous ups and downs, and this is one of the sadder episodes in David's life. Right now, we've reached the point where, because of Saul's enmity to David, he's hiding out in Philistine country. The Philistines are the great enemy of Israel during David's time. And by God's grace, David doesn't have to take up arms against his own people, even though he's living and serving the Philistine king. But Israel and Philistia are kind of like have a great climatic battle. And tragically, Israel loses. Even though they're God's chosen people, they're defeated. And not only that, during the course of the battle, King Saul is killed, and his son Jonathan is also killed. And so David hears this news, and the episode that we're going to talk today about is how he responds to that news. And so I titled today's sermon, David Laments. And lament is a term that maybe you're not too familiar with. If I had said David sorrows or David grieves, you guys would have been able to, understand that term. Those are pretty common terms. Those are pretty common experiences. But to say when something laments, what does that mean? So that's what we're going to be dealing with today. The lament is God's way for how He wants you to handle the losses, the griefs, the sorrows in your life. That He's provided a way so that you can not only endure the tragedies and the sorrows and the losses in life, but overcome them and experience victory, and also be a part of somehow God can get glory through these kind of incidents in our lives. That's what we're going to talk about today. And so join with me as we read the scripture. Let me start with a quick word of prayer. Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart, our hearts, be acceptable to you, our Lord and our Redeemer. So hear the word of the Lord, 2 Samuel chapter 1, verses 17 to 27. David's lament for Saul and Jonathan. Remember that he's just heard the news that the Israelites have suffered a great defeat, and that King Saul and his best friend Jonathan have been killed. So David took up this lament concerning Saul and his son Jonathan. And he ordered that the people of Judah be taught this lament of the bow. It is written in the book of Jasher. A gazelle lies slain on your heights, Israel. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath. Proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines be glad, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised rejoice. Mountains of Gilboa, may you have neither dew nor rain. May no showers fall on your terraced fields. For there the shield of the mighty was despised. The shield of Saul no longer rubbed with oil. Gilboa was the place of the battlefield. From the blood of the slain, from the flesh of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back. The sword of Saul did not return unsatisfied. Saul and Jonathan, in life, they were loved and admired, and in death, they were not parted. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions. Daughters of Israel, weep for Saul, who clothed you in scarlet and finery, who adorned your garments with ornaments of gold. How the mighty have fallen in battle. Jonathan lies slain on your heights. I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women. How the mighty have fallen, the weapons of war have perished. May the Lord add the blessing to the reading of His Word. So, to give you a context, this passage probably strikes you as kind of peculiar. Some of the sentiments that are being expressed are kind of strange. The culture of David's time is quite different from ours, and so we're having, many of you no doubt as you read this passage maybe even for the first time, you're having your hard time getting your mind around it. So let me give you a context. What's going on in Israel at this time? What is David talking about? So for me, I'm a baby boomer. Okay, so I was born in 1955, and so that picture of John Kennedy, his assassination and his death, that was one of the defining moments for my generation. You ask anybody who's American born, who was a baby boomer, what were you doing when you heard the news when John F. Kennedy was shot? And they'll be able to tell you, almost guaranteed. I was in 3rd grade. I was in my primary class. My teacher was also the principal of the school. At about late morning, the first secretary came in and said, we just received word that President Kennedy has been assassinated. And then it just kind of threw up the whole day in total disorder. And we're actually released from class early. They sent us home early that day. Back in those days, there were only 3 television stations, okay, 3 networks. And so from that point on, all 3 networks, all they covered was this story. It was the first huge media event. The next day, the accused assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, was himself murdered. The body was taken to Washington, where it was laid in state. And then on Monday morning, they canceled school, and we watched the funeral service on TV. And of course, the captured moment, that was John F. Kennedy Jr., the little boy there who was saluting. That was like the moment that kind of crystallized the whole memory. As the body was being on a horse-drawn carriage going by, John F. Kennedy's son, came to attention and saluted his father's body as it went by. And it was for us the defining moment, for this generation, something that's indelibly etched in our brain. It was a time of sorrow, a time of grief. The first time it was something that affected the whole country. Businesses were shut down, schools were shut down. It was a time of great national calamity. For this other generation, for the more modern, so for some of you who are older, you can relate to what I've been saying. For the rest of you, the other defining generation is, of course, 9/11. Okay, you can probably remember what you were doing when you heard about 9/11, and you probably stopped what you were doing, got to a TV as quickly as you could, and turned on the TV to see the whole unfolding events. So the event that's happening in this week's episode and as recorded is somewhat similar. It's a national catastrophe for Israel. And God is doing something here, and David needs to try to find out, and as a leader of his people, he needs to try to process his own emotions. He has to look at reality and all of its ugliness and somehow see hope and see faith, and then also see love there. Okay, next slide, please. Because it's not only just these huge national calamities that each of us in our life, there's going to be loss. Okay? You're going to suffer loss in your life. It's a part of life. Okay? And just because you're a Christian, just because you're a child of God, doesn't make you exempt from losses. I wish it were true. I wish I could tell you, once you get saved, it's just going to be, just a walk through the daisies the rest of your life. But you all know that that's not true, right? The Bible tells very clearly in the book of Job, mankind is born to trouble, surely as sparks fly upward. If you ever gone around a campfire, you can see the sparks is always going up. And so, the Job says man is born to trouble. There's always going to be adversity. There's going to be losses in your life. And sometime in the course of your life, you're going to suffer the losses of significant people in your life, loved ones, family members. You may lose your job. You may lose your home. You may relationships may break up. All kinds of difficult things may happen. You may undergo illness and, all these kind of situations. Ecclesiastes, the person who wrote Ecclesiastes said, very wisely said, there's a time to weep and there's a time to laugh. There's a time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to gain and a time to lose. That's the fact of life. Okay? And when we suffer those losses, next slide please, it really hits us very, very, very hard. Okay? This kind of grief and sorrow is a very powerful emotional experience. It doesn't just affect our emotion, it affects the body, soul, and the spirit. So the psalmist in Psalm 31 kind of accurately portrays what happens to us when we suffer loss. And so this guy's crying out, the psalmist is crying out to God. He says, "Be merciful to me, Lord, for I am in distress. My eyes grow weak with sorrow, my soul and body with grief. My life is consumed by anguish, and my years by groaning. My strength fails because of my affliction, and my bones grow weak." It affects the body, soul, and the spirit. Next slide. But is that all there is to it? The good news of the gospel is that God is at work in these kind of times. So in this slide, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a theology of grief and sorrow and loss. And so, first point I want to make is that everything good in our life is a blessing from God. Every week you sing the doxology, right? Praise God from whom all blessings flow. So you take a look at your life, and anything good in your life, our theology tells us it comes from God. God is a God who loves us. He's a God who rejoices in blessing His people. And not only that, we have the promise that if you love God and you're called according to the purpose, then all things will work together for good. And it's a good thing to enjoy God's blessings. Okay, that's my second point. God gave us all these blessings for us to enjoy. But what happens when we suffer the loss of something that is important to us? Then this is where the reality of the Christian faith really starts to come to bear. That our theology tells us that God is faithful in times of grief. And primarily because we have a Savior who is sympathetic to that, who understands that, and is there to help us. And so Isaiah predicted that Jesus was going to be a man of sorrows. So He's God, but He's also man, and He's acquainted with grief. And then one of these days, if you guys invite me during the Lenten Easter season, I'm going to tell you about what happened on the cross. One of the things that happened on the cross when Jesus died on the cross is that He bore our griefs and He carried our sorrows. So it's because God loved us so much, He sent Jesus to help us in our times of difficulty, in our times of sorrow, in our times of loss. Jesus already on the cross has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Not only that, on a moment-by-moment basis, Jesus is a compassionate high priest. Hebrews tells us, "For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who is in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. So therefore come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace and help in time of need." So our theology tells us whenever you suffer loss, anytime you suffer grief, anytime you suffer sorrow, you have a mediator, somebody who's on your side who's going to offer his help. He's alongside of you. Jesus, the compassionate high priest. Right now in heaven, that's His job, is to be there at the right hand of the Father, interceding on our behalf, giving us the mercy and grace when we ask Him for it. Not only that, Jesus, before He left His disciples, He made a promise in John that recorded this. This is Jesus talking. "Most assuredly I say to you that you will weep and lament, and the world will rejoice. And you will be sorrowful, but your sorrow will be turned into joy. A woman, when she is in labor, has sorrow because her hour has come. But as soon as she has given birth to the child, she no longer remembers the anguish for joy that a human being has been born into the world. Therefore you now have sorrow, but I will see you again, and your heart will rejoice, and your joy no one will take from you." As you enter into this relationship with Jesus, as you build your trust and faith in Him, as you found your life on Jesus, on your relationship with God, as you become His faithful disciple, He'll give you, your heart will rejoice, and your joy no one will ever take from you. And then the other promise, Peter, the last dimension I want to talk about in this theology of grief and sorrow is that God is at work in these seasons of grief. Once again, as I said, that promise, if you are love God and if you are called according to His purposes, even the difficult things God will transform into positives into your life. And so Peter says, in this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while, if need be, you have been grieved by various trials, so that the genuineness of your faith, being much more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to praise, honor, and glory as the revelation of Jesus Christ, whom having not seen you love. Though now you do not see Him, yet believing you rejoice with joy inexpressible and full of glory, receiving the end of your faith, the salvation of your souls. And so, you take just to give you a little bit of a metaphor, take a look at, you ever get a pencil and take a look at the stuff that's graphite, that's carbon, okay? And then take a look at a diamond. That's carbon too. Chemically, they're the same. But what's the difference between graphite, lead in your pencil, and a diamond ring? The diamond in the diamond ring. Well, the diamond has undergone great pressure and heat, and that's caused it to be with. So that in God's economy, in God's kingdom, God's going to take the pressures in your life, the adversity in your life, the heat in your life, and He's going to use it to transform you so that you're no longer just carbon. Now, lead pencils are useful, but diamond's much more beautiful, much more valuable. God's at work in trying to turn us from pencils into diamonds. Okay, and every experience, every difficult experience you have in your life, as long as you're trusting in God, following God, open to what God has, He's going to take those things and transform them to your good and His glory. Next slide. And so, how does God take us from this sorrow to joy? It's a process, okay? And it's part of that process is the lament. Okay, so here we're going to talk about what a lament is. So a lament is a form. This is from a guy who wrote a very nice commentary on 2 Samuel. He's a very good Old Testament scholar. He's just wonderful. I have his books. I get a lot from it. A lot of my ideas that I got for today's sermon came from engaging his commentary. So he says a lament is a formal expression of grief that could be reduced to a written form. It's a formal expression of grief, distress that can be written, read, learned, practiced, repeated. It is a vehicle for mind and emotions. A lament is an expression of thoughtful grief. So you take your circumstances, you look at your emotions, and then you say, God, what are you up to in this kind of situation? What can I do to bear this? How can you help me, God? I need your help to bear this situation. God, what do I need to do so that I can benefit from this experience? And that's what a lament does. So we have what we call good grief, not good grief or but good grief. We are able to honestly, good grief means that when you undergo a difficult situation, when you suffer a loss, when you experience sorrow or pain in your life over whatever situation, a dream has died, an opportunity seems like a door has been shut in your face, you've had a failure, a relationship is broken up, someone you loved has died, any of these kind of situations, lose a job, lose a friendship, any of these kind of situations are losses. And how can you start to get around and recover from that loss, move on, but at the same time be positively benefit from these kind of experiences? And so it takes what the process is this. You have to honestly understand the reality. There's a part of us that when something bad happens, sometimes we go into shock or we go into denial. We just don't want to think about it. We just say, hey, or we try to escape. Just start playing video games around the clock, or just don't want to deal with it. But if you lament, forces you to deal with it. Instead of dealing with unreality, going to an alternate reality, you deal with the reality that's there, the real reality, as it were. Okay, so you need to honestly understand the reality and start in your own. You also have to monitor your emotional responses. For men, that's kind of hard. I'm really emotionally detached. So that's the harder part of the equation. I can generally look at reality, or I'm great at looking at somebody else's reality. I have a little bit more trouble looking at my reality, but I really have a hard time dealing with my emotions. But as you ask God to help you, and God will provide somebody that'll help you to start to deal with your emotions in a healthy way. And then you need to discern God's point of view. You've got to seek God. What's up to? Why did you? God, He may never answer the question why He did this. But at the same time, your faith has to say, God, what are you doing? At least seeking the answer. Seek to understand what God is up to, even though you may not always get an answer. And then the final step is acceptance, where you've been able to look at that reality and say, okay, it is what it is, or however you want to express it. And so, once again, Job is the book that tells us how to deal with that kind of calamity. And so Job gets to this point. He got up, he tore his robe, and he shaved his head. Those are signs of grief. Then he fell to the ground and worshiped. Okay, so Job's going through this grief thing. Then he's able to exclaim, after he worships God, after he does his lament, he says, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave me, and the Lord has taken it away. May the name of the Lord be praised. That's acceptance. That's the situation where you want to end up in. So let's take a look at this story, and hopefully you'll be able to see what's going on. Maybe this lament will start to make more sense given this context of, this is a healthy God's way of dealing with sorrow, pain, and loss in your life. So first verse, we didn't read these verses, but when David immediately hears the news that Israel has been defeated, that the Philistines have won, that King Saul and Jonathan have been killed, this was their reaction. Then David and all the men with him took hold of their clothes and he tore them. Okay, that was the Jewish way of expressing profound grief. Okay? They mourned and they wept and they fasted till evening for Saul and his son Jonathan and for the army of the Lord and for the nation of Israel because they had fallen by the sword. So this was an immediate emotional response to the situation, following the normal cultural methods of dealing with pain and sorrow in your life. And that was like spontaneous, okay? But now, after that spontaneous thing, after a little bit of time has elapsed, now you have to start to deal with the situation. And so David has a new identity, he has a new role. David is a man after God's own heart. And because he's completely sold out to God, he's completely open to what God has for him and what he wants, he's obedient to what God wants him to do, God's able to use him in a remarkable way. And so in this instance, what he's doing is he's operating as a priest. And one definition of the priest is that he presents God to the people. So he's saying, Israel, you've suffered a great calamity, you've suffered a great loss. We need to deal with it. Okay? And this is how I'm going to help you deal with it. So the verse says, David took up his lament concerning Saul and his son Jonathan, and he ordered that the people of Judah be taught this lament to the bow. So David, because he had this ongoing relationship with God, he probably went off to the field, and he went off to a quiet spot, and he kind of prayed, and he worshiped God, and he meditated, and he worked out all these kind of responses. And primarily what I want to focus on are the emotions that came with this. As the lament goes on, it deals with various emotions. And first the emotion is sorrow, this kind of this overwhelming sadness of the situation. And we all appreciate people who can kind of put our emotions into words. And so that phrase, how the mighty have fallen, it's mentioned 3 times. In verse 19, 25, 27. It's a very poetically beautiful way of encapsulating a very complicated event in a very short, precise way, but in a very emotive way, a way that emotions can do. You can kind of see the sadness out of that. And so Dave was able to express that. And when everybody who heard it would say the same thing, they would just kind of probably weep. Next emotion that he's dealing with is shame. Okay? So Israelite culture is what they call an honor shame. To be defeated by your enemy is a shameful thing. Okay? And so he deals with the shame of the people. And he brings it out. He said, yeah, we've suffered a great defeat. Okay? But so Gath is the city, and one of the primary cities of the Philistines, and the cities of Ashkelon. And he's kind of dealing, he's telling, hey, we've suffered this great defeat, but in Ashkelon and in Gath, they're celebrating it. I don't know, after 9/11, there were these news reports where in some of the countries that were enemies to the U.S., when they saw that the towers had fallen, they were celebrating in the streets. They were shouting and yelling and firing off guns because they thought it was they were really happy to see the Twin Towers go down. You know, and then when I saw that, I felt ashamed. I felt angry at those countries that would, you know, when there was loss of thousands of innocent people's lives, you know, in an act of treachery, kind of act of terrorism, that they would, you know, celebrate that. You know, sort of the same thing. So he said, mountains of Gilboa, you have neither dew nor. So also he's kind of cursing those mountains because this bad event happened, but it's a way of getting people's shame and anger focused. And a lot of people will tell you, oh, you shouldn't feel shame. You can't help it. Sometimes things are, you know, sometimes you're going to feel shame. And some shame is healthy shame. There is unhealthy shame, but this is healthy shame here. And David's preparing his people. He says, there's going to be a time, we're not always going to be defeated. We need to pick ourselves up again. And we have to, one day, there's going to be a day of reckoning. There's going to be a day, not so much of vengeance, but a day when we're going to, you know, when we're going to address this shameful thing that happened to us. And, you know, and so later on, David's career was, you know, he basically kind of he conquered the Philistines. Next emotion that he does is gratitude and appreciation. Okay. One of the positive things you can do anytime you suffer loss is to value the thing that you lost. Okay. Make sure. So in this one he's talking about Saul. Now Saul was a guy was David's nemesis. David never saw Saul as the enemy, even though Saul saw David as his personal enemy. David always saw Saul as God's anointed king of Israel, even though David was also the anointed king of Israel at the same time. Okay? But he never personally saw Saul as his enemy. And so he was able, out of the goodness of his heart, out of the generosity of his spirit, out of his own noble character that God had been building him, is able to show appreciation to David and Jonathan, both as kings and prince of Israel. And you know, the big thing about this, this last year and a half, I suffered the loss of my aunt, my uncle, and my father. Okay, you're better off doing this while they're still living, and telling them personally how much you love them, how much you value them, how much you appreciate them. You'll find that that's a better thing. If anything, I can give you hope for is that this is the best way to do it. Is show your appreciation, your gratitude to people while they're still alive. Next emotion that we're dealing with is love. How the mighty have fallen in battle. Then this is one of the most beautiful sections where he deals with his love for his best friend of his life. Okay. How the mighty have fallen in battle. Jonathan lies slain. I grieve for you. Jonathan was his soulmate, his best bud, whatever expression you want to have. We don't even have words that really are in our culture. Our relationships are so shallow. But Jonathan and David had a brotherhood, a kind of a relationship that was very strong. Now, certain people want to turn this into a sexual thing. It's pretty clearly it's not. That was homosexual behavior. It was shameful. They would have never expressed that kind of thought if it was sexual in orientation. Even though the gay Christians or gay religious people want to make this into kind of a justification for homosexuality, it's clearly not. At the same time, we have the situation. So as you go through this lament step by step for the children of Israel, this would have been a very healing experience for them. They would have been able to deal with their emotion. They would have been able to accept their reality and be able to be in a position where they could move on. Now, what has God up to in this situation? In retrospect, we kind of know what's going on. First, we're prepared. God is preparing David for king of Israel. Now, I don't know how you choose when it comes time to vote for the president of the United States. I don't know how you go about choosing him, how you make your selection. But for me, I look at the person, especially the highest offices, I look at that person and I say to myself, is this person big enough to do the job? Does he have enough, by that I mean primarily, does he have enough character? Does he have enough virtue in his life? Does he have enough nobility in his life that I can trust him with the power of being President of the United States? And that's that's something that, I learned from the Bible. That ultimately it's character that makes the difference in leadership. And what this is David's character is on full display. His genuineness, his transparency, his warmth, his kind of his dignity, his nobility, that he can even honor a guy who tried to kill him on numerous occasions. So it just kind of shows you, it's a demonstration that when you cooperate with God, God will make you big enough for whatever job that He has for you. And that David's character was no accident and was being forged step by step as he goes through this adversity, and as he was able to work through that. The way David was able to lament for the whole nation of Israel was because he had learned how to lament for his own personal losses. At the same time, God's preparing the children of Israel to be God's chosen people. And then in this incident, God's moving on. When I came in November, October, we talked about God's great story of redemption, about the saving God. This is one of the big chapters. David's kingship. Jesus eventually is seen as a son of David, kind of. And so let's get kind of practical here. If you take anything away from today's sermon, it's how to incorporate a lament as a spiritual practice in your life. I talk about a spiritual toolbox. How to read the Bible, how to pray, how to witness, how to encourage and support each other, how to serve God. These are all skills that you need to have in kind of a spiritual toolbox. And a lament is something that you need to add to your spiritual toolbox. Because one thing modern culture is not very good at is how to deal with these kind of losses. Okay? They're going to tell you take a pill. They're going to tell you, go see a professional. They're going to tell you all kinds of different things. Then the society, will give you all kinds of escapes. They'll help you deny it. They'll do all these kind of things. They won't help you to deal with it in a healthy way. But the church can. You have a great resource in the Bible. The book of Psalms. There's 150 chapters in the book of Psalms. And somewhere between, it depends on how different people categorize, but at least 50 of them or 70 of them are laments. And so in any particular situation you find yourself, you're going to be able to find a situation that comes pretty close to the situation that you're facing. So get familiar with the book of Psalms. There's I just started pacing through this morning. Psalm 3 is a lament. Psalm 4. You just kind of, it's people dealing with adversity in their life and going to God for help. And these are the components of a lament as a spiritual practice. So next time you suffer a loss, next time there's a difficult situation in your life, first thing you need to do is just cry out to God. God's going to be your help. God's going to be your salvation in these kind of situations. You need to rely on God. A lot of people tell you, oh, religion's a crutch for weak people. Well, sometimes all of us are going to reach a point that we're going to face problems that are bigger than we are. But no problem that you face is too big for God. So we need to cry out to God. And we need to follow the example of David to be able to express clearly and honestly to God your situation. Exactly as you see it. And you need to ask God specifically for certain things. Whatever you want God to do. You'll notice in the Psalms, people ask very specifically, God, I want you to deliver. God, I have these enemies that are surrounding me. I want you to, help me to endure them. Help me to have victory over them. Whatever. In my situation, I don't have that many enemies. I find I'm my own worst enemy. There's parts of me that that I need to have control. I need God to have control over. You have to acknowledge God's authority in your life. You have to constantly reaffirm your trust in God and praise and thank God in advance and ask God for that next step of faith that you need to take. And this is the difference between Christianity and other religions. Christianity gives you a Savior that will help you through these situations. Take, for instance, Buddhism. Buddhism says they acknowledge that the situation is the same, that loss is a big problem in the human condition. What's their solution? They say, don't get attached to things, therefore when you lose them, it won't hurt so much. That was basically Buddha's message, right? Don't get attached. You know, the difference between Christianity and Buddhism is Christianity says all those good things in your life, they came from God. You know, when God brings a wife or a mother and a father, good friends in your life, you know, spouse, children, love them. But if they have to be taken away in God's plan, there's a way out. You'll have a Savior that will be walking alongside of you, that will help you in this kind of situation. There's a way out. You don't have to not love them. Okay? And finally, I guess I want to finish up by saying, claim God's promises. You know, maybe my analysis about the theology of grief and everything was kind of confusing. Maybe that biblical text, you're still wondering, what's he talking about, a gazelle on the mountain? I mean, I don't get any of that. But if I have to summarize my sermon in the simplest thing, God has promises. And God's a faithful God, and he keeps his promises. Okay? And this is one of the promises of God that has most been encouraging to me over the years. As I started trusting God, I was hoping that it would mean that I would have an easy life, but I found out that my life got a lot more complicated and a lot more difficult. But I found out that I could endure it. Okay? And this promise from God has been a constant source of encouragement to me in good times and in bad. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary, and he increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. So, I have two stories. I have to kind of make up my mind which one I'm going to tell. I didn't predetermine it. Okay, so my father passed away. I heard in April or May that he was sick, got incurable cancer. When you get cancer when you're 93, they don't bother to cure it. They just say, okay, we're going to make you comfortable, and you know, that's it. And so I was able to come home on 2 different occasions, and you know, my relationship, my father was a great Christian man, but like any father and son, you're going to have, you know, rocky roads. Basically, he's living in New York and I'm living in California, and that's no accident that I'm living in Detroit. He's living in New York and I'm living in California. Found that was the distance we kind of needed to be able to keep our relationship healthy, kind of. But he was a great man in a lot of ways. And so I had to get over all the difficulties that we had. And I had to make my peace with him. And I had to figure out what was his legacy to me. So I had to go through this lamenting process. I mean, God was very, very, very gracious. I flew on eagle's wings. We come home on 2 different occasions. There was a lot of family situations that we had to resolve. Then I had to do a funeral. The first funeral I've ever done was for my father. God was gracious. The whole family came together pretty well, and the service was a real joy celebration of his life. And it was a blessing for me to do it. And then for the last, so that was in September, right? Late August? So then the last 3 months has been me trying to figure out what is his legacy to me, and how do I carry on? What does it mean to be a son when he's up in heaven? And how do I take what he's given me, and how do I go through it? And God's been graciously taking me step by step through this whole process. As I lamented my loss, as I looked at our relationship, the good and the bad, you know, we're able to do it. So I want to tell you that this verse is true from my personal testimony. That God will carry you on eagle's wings for those difficult times. And next time you face a situation that's difficult, you know, I'm not asking you to take this on faith. I'm saying that next time you have a difficult situation, claim this promise of God, and it's going to work. The other way to do it is to find a song that will mean something to you. So all this week, for some reason, this song kept on popping up. We have Pandora, right? And so we have a channel that we have, and this song kept on coming up. I said, oh, this song's perfect. So it's called Be Still My Soul. Be still my soul, the Lord is on thy side. Bear patiently the cross of grief or pain. Leave to thy God to order and provide. In everything he faithful will remain. Be still my soul, thy best, thy heavenly friend, through thorny ways leads to a joyful end. Be still my soul, thy God doth undertake, to guide the future as he has the past. Thy hope, thy confidence, let nothing shake. All now mysterious shall be bright at last. Be still my soul, the waves and winds still know his voice will rule them while he dwelt below. Be still my soul, the hour is hastening on, when we shall be forever with the Lord. When disappointment, grief, and fear are gone, sorrow forgot, and love's purest joys restored. Be still my soul, when change and tears are past, all safe and blessed we shall meet at last. That's better. That's salvation. That's good news. And that's better than any other religion can ever give you. May you experience that.